Closing arguments are the most enjoyable part of mock trial, in my opinion. When you give a closing argument, you summarize all of the evidence that came in at trial, and you make arguments based off of that for why the jury should find for your client, why the jury should not view as credible your opponent's evidence, and overall just make your case in a really aggressive, creative way. And so I said creative, so what do I mean by that? One thing that's really important, I think, in a mock trial closing argument is to start your statement, start your argument off with your theme. Reiterate your theme. Your opening attorney should probably introduce the theme, but you should be the one to hammer it home. So you start off your closing argument reminding the jury of that theme again. Say it, loop it in there. Do a good dramatic pause. And then you want to move on and you want to introduce yourself. Probably introduce your co-counsel, tell them who you represent again. Just get that out there. They probably remember, but maybe not. People have short attention spans. So you tell them who you represent. You tell them what the suit is about. Again, that we've brought claims against this defendant for this, or if you're the defendant, they've charged us with this. And then you go on to tell the story again, summarize the evidence again, but do so in a way that's partisan, do so in a way that's biased, because you, of course, have to zealously advocate for your client. Tell it in a biased way, and then you move on to talk about the law. You talk about the law by bringing up the elements of the charges or claims, if it's a civil case. You talk about the burdens. If you're the defense, you're going to want to put a very strong focus on the burden and the fact that the burden is not on you. Now, the burden could be on you for affirmative defenses that you've raised. That's something that happens in civil cases. It's pretty common, something like comparative negligence, assumption of risk, superseding cause. So in those cases, the plaintiff is going to want to bring up the burden, the defense having the burden on those affirmative defenses to let the jury know that although we've charged them with this and we have the burden by a preponderance of the evidence or clear and convincing evidence, they have the burden on their affirmative defenses. So there are burdens going both ways in a typical case that's civil, at least. In a prosecution, a criminal prosecution, the defense is going to want to aggressively point out the beyond a reasonable doubt thing. You're going to want to start poking holes in the prosecution's theory. You're going to want to bring up the stuff that came in at trial and say, this creates reasonable doubt. Explain to the jury why it creates reasonable doubt. If you're the prosecution, you've got a difficult job to do in terms of your burden. You've got to explain why there's no reasonable doubt left. I would, of course, throw in something there about how beyond a reasonable doubt does not mean beyond any doubt, reasonable doubt. So I view it as like basically a 99% chance that they're guilty. The 1% chance is unreasonable doubt. It's the miracle situation. So say, you know what? The defense doesn't want you to believe your own eyes. It's very, very, very likely that this defendant is guilty. So yeah, that's what the prosecution is going to want to argue. What you'll say if you're a prosecution closing argument giver. You're going to want to also keep it looping your theme in there, keep bringing it in, hammering away at it so that the jury remembers you. O.J. Simpson's counsel back in the 90s, they said if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. So think of something catchy, think of something that rhymes, think of an axiom, something to stick with the jury. You're going to also want to move around a lot. Now, I am saying this as a theater kid, so I'm biased in favor of moving because I auditioned for shows and did monologues, but you're going to want to use your space. If you're just standing there and staring at the jury and moving your hands, that's going to get a little boring. You'll want to move around. And you know what? Move around confidently. Move around with purpose. So what I mean by that, go over to opposing counsel's table. Put your hand on it. That shows confidence. That shows you're not afraid of the attorneys taking you on. Maybe even look the opposing client in the eyes. So sometimes the main defendant might be sitting at the defense table. Look at them when you talk. Be intimidating. Be powerful. Make good eye contact with the jury, but also when you look at opposing counsel, make good eye contact with them. Be showy. Walk around and do your thing. Strut your stuff. So yeah, you want to move a lot. You want to make sure that you have the right tone. Fluctuate your voice. Speak slower when you need to. Speak slower when you're telling a story. Like, so he reached for the knife. He ran up to the victim and he slashed his throat and ran away. Took a taxi. So be strategic. Be strategic like that. Think of ways to adjust your voice, and of course, be memorized. Memorize what you're going to say. Now, don't be so scripted and so memorized and so rehearsed that you come off as inauthentic. I think you really need to go overboard for that. But just come in with a great idea of what you're going to say. But also, you do need to be prepared earlier on, in the trial. Make sure that you know what evidence is in and what evidence is out, because sometimes people will object to your evidence. It'll get sustained and you won't be able to introduce that evidence, and then you won't be able to use it in closing. And people can actually object during closing arguments and say, objection, this is not in evidence. I know there are some mock trial competitions that don't allow you to object during openings or closings, and that you should just opposing counsel should just rebut it in their own. But usually objecting during openings and closings is a thing that can happen. It's not viewed favorably. It's viewed as kind of petty, but there are some legitimately good reasons for it. Another good reason for objecting is burden shifting. So make sure, if you're the prosecution or the plaintiff, you are not accusing the defense of having a burden that they do not have, because they can object due to burden shifting on that. So don't say like, oh, the defense has not proven that their client is innocent. The defense has not proven that their client was not liable. They have not given any evidence that would help show that their client is not liable. They don't have the burden to do that, so avoid saying that. You want to conclude on a note that's really strong too. Find something emotionally powerful. And usually this is easier for the side where someone was victimized. So prosecution, if there's a victim crime, a crime with a victim, or plaintiff, like in a wrongful death case, there's great opportunity to tug at people's heartstrings when you're the plaintiff in a wrongful death action. Someone is dead because of the defendant's conduct. And throw some dramatic pauses in there. Think of something clever to say like, oh, don't let the defendant slip through the cracks, because there are no cracks in our foundation to begin with. Our case is that strong. I would say that if you're doing a defense closing argument, this is something to do. It's strategic, it's clever, it's sort of hitting the plaintiff or the prosecution on your way out the door. So the plaintiff and the prosecution have the right to give a rebuttal since they're the one who has the burden. And so what you would say is, now the plaintiff or the prosecution, they get to have the last word. But do they have the stronger evidence? Do they have evidence that they can hang their hats on? They do not. We do. Although they get the last word, we have something more important, and it's evidence that we can hang our hats on. Something like that. Or maybe tell the jury, now opposing counsel will get up here and deliver a rebuttal. They'll tell you all sorts of things, but keep in mind what they cannot tell you, and then explain why that thing that they cannot tell you is so important, why it establishes that they have not met their burden. Something like that is really good, since you know they're going to go and come after you during rebuttal. And usually rebuttals are very fiery, very aggressive from plaintiffs and prosecution. So be prepared for that. You also, if you have a client there too, it might be interesting or clever, not only to go over to opposing counsel's table, but go to your own table. Put your hands on your client's shoulders or something like that. Something that's just, if your client's sympathetic, or at least not terribly unsympathetic, do something like that. So to recap, you're going to start with your theme. You're going to introduce yourself again, probably introduce your co-counsel, tell them who you represent, go into the facts, tell the story in an extremely biased way, explain the law, explain the burdens, explain how the facts that you've recited to them help your side either meet your burden or prevent the other side from meeting their burden, or help you meet your burden on an affirmative defense. So with that, then, you're going to move into concluding remarks within your closing statement. You're going to kind of summarize things. And while you're doing all of this, you're repeating your theme, making sure that it sticks with the jury, making sure that the jury remembers you, because that is such an important thing. Don't burden shift. Don't talk about evidence that was not introduced in trial. Use a tone that fits what you're saying. Fluctuate your voice. Do not be monotone, and make good eye contact. Eye contact is so important. Eye contact is confidence. You'd be surprised how many people are just afraid to make eye contact. They look at the floor, they look at the ceiling or something like that, or they look off to the side. Good eye contact is key. And so you're going to want to conclude on something really strong. For plaintiff and prosecution, also save some points for rebuttal. Like if you're going to talk about what the defense says and what they argue, wait till they actually give their closing argument and then talk about it in your rebuttal. If you're the defense, take a parting shot at the plaintiff or the prosecution on your way out the door and say they haven't met their burden, they're going to deliver a rebuttal, and they're not going to meet their burden in that rebuttal. So yeah, that is the idea of the closing argument. It is super fun. It is super fun, trust me. Once you get that thing memorized and you're ready to go, you're going to have a great time in mock trial closing arguments. Let me know what you think in the comments below about closing arguments. Please like, comment, or subscribe to the channel. This has been The More the Merrier, and I look forward to speaking to you in my next video.